So I want to introduce you to Veronica Mancia, who is a longtime friend of our conference. She is an international expert on global and intercultural education. She is a senior principal investigator at Project Zero at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Project Zero does a lot of amazing things if you're not familiar with it, particularly on the global front. And we have at least 4 sessions that are based on Project Zero's thinking routines at the conference, by the way.
That's cool.
Which is exciting, don't you think, Veronica?
It's awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah. And Veronica's research examines conditions that enable individuals to understand and take action on the most pressing issues of our times, from human migration to environmental stewardship. Frameworks and practical tools developed through her research have set the foundations for quality, interdisciplinary, global, and intercultural education in high-impact institutions, including AFS International, the Asia Society, Harvard Project Zero, International Baccalaureate, National Academy of Sciences, National Gallery of Art, OECD, Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and the Smithsonian Institution, among others. We'll put her links in the chat in a moment so you can follow her work. But I'm going to turn it over to her right now and pull up her slides. And thank you so much, Veronica, for being here. We're so excited to hear from you. And I know that you're going to set the tone for an amazing conference the next 2 days.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lucy. It's just such a pleasure to be here with everybody. And I think that this is exactly how we change the world, right? So a collection of people who are really committed to a cause, and the cause in this case is, global education, is intercultural education, is peace, so needed these days. And this is what we do. We get together and we share ideas, we learn from one another, and we push an agenda forward in order to reinvent education for our times. So I'm really delighted to be here. And I will begin by asking you a question. You don't need to answer in the chat, but simply to think about the following. I would like to know, and maybe you want to think about, so have you been to the movies lately? Have you read any literature, any good stories, any, for those of you in Argentina, like some Latin American novels or literature? Have you been reading the newspapers lately? Have you traveled lately? Have you been visiting another place, another neighborhood, another city lately? These are the kinds of questions that the first important mentor that I had in my life when I was very young asked me the day she met me. Her name was Edith Lidwin, and she was a professor at the University of Buenos Aires. And I wondered why, as we walked out of a classroom of 400 students or so, why she would ask me these questions that at first seemed unrelated to the very interesting cognitive psychology and technology and education class that she was teaching. And as I was answering, at some point she turns to me and she says, "You see, Veronica, that going to the movies, reading poetry, looking at art, reading the newspaper, all of that is the homework of the educator. Because how are we going to be able to educate our young for the future, for the present, if we don't understand it ourselves?" So I thought that invitation was an invitation that was of enormous generosity for us to grow as human beings, as adults, as citizens of this world, citizens of local reality and nations and world, and to rethink what we do in education, why we do what we do, what kind of learning we're looking for, and how to support that type of learning best. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have a little bit of time with you to just share some ideas that I hope will provoke our thinking, help us raise some questions, and perhaps leave us with a few bits to think a little bit further about. Since the task that we have, our collective task of educating the whole learner for the whole world, educating children and youth to transform and to participate in the world in which we live, is not a minor task. And it's good to see that we have so many of us working on it together. So 3 questions for today. And this is going to be a little bit interactive. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some question at the end, but please feel free to jot your questions along the way so that at some point perhaps Lucy can sort of pick one or two for us to revisit towards the end of this conversation. Global competence education, to what end in our world today? First question. Our second question is, what kind of learning do we seek? What are the qualities of learning that we seek? Those of us in education think about learning all the time. So this is an invitation for us to think about what are the qualities that we're looking for, and how might some social, emotional, global thinking routines. This is like for those of you who have been working with thinking routines from Project Zero. This is like another set of new routines that we've been working on that embrace the social emotional dimensions. So how can these routines, and I'll explain what they are, help us move learning forward? So the agenda, sort of the order in which we'll do things, we're going to examine first a little bit like this idea of global competence as a compass, so really thinking about the purpose of our work. Then we'll explore this qualities of learning to see, we're going to see a video. It's a really wonderful video that encapsulates really powerful learning. So we're going to try to understand, Aquala's work and Aquala's thinking in order to, this girl's thinking in order to gain more nuance in the ways in which we think about learning and the learning that we're after. We'll sort of touch on an experience of these global social emotional thinking routines, and then I would like to connect you with a few resources that you might find interesting in order to continue to learn. So I hope that sounds like a good plan. So examine global competence, practices, principles, and ends, purposes. So the work that I will share with you comes, from over a decade of, research and studies in global education and in a variety of contexts. So you will see, a few references to, an earlier publication with Tony Jackson in Asia Society, some work with the OECD, some more recent, most recent books will have a little bit of references to that. But just to ground us, when we think about global education and global competence, the way in which I think about it is, several of us are thinking about it, is really that we would like young people to be able to examine the world, to investigate the world and the local and intercultural issues that are, shaping our realities today, and, that they really sort of are part of our lives: climate change, migration, poverty, AI. We would like young people to develop the capacity to take perspective, understand the perspectives of others, and really be willing to refrain from judging, and really willing to understand and listen carefully, and to inform their worldviews and others, understand who they are, how the culture informs who they are. We want young people who will be able to engage in open conversations with others, to communicate across differences. Boy, do we need this today? Do we need the capacity to communicate even when we disagree with one another, and to really bridge the perspectives? And we want young people to be able to take action, to really work with others in order to have some sense of purpose for what they learn and what they do, to solve problems, to create new solutions, to create new technologies, to create new works of art, but really sort of work together. So if we think about it, I'd like to sort of, in the spirit of thinking about, the kind of learning that we're looking for, the purpose of our teaching and our educational systems, I'd like to just invite you to travel with me through five different classrooms. And I find these classrooms exciting because I think that they they capture really powerful forms of learning and powerful ways of thinking about who we consider our learners to be and for what kind of society we're preparing them. So as you hear my short vignettes about these classrooms, I would like you to be thinking, what is the image of the child, the image of the learner that seems to be driving this work? And what is the image of the societies that we want to see that is driving this work as well? So first comes Emily. Emily teaches biology, and she teaches a unit on virology every year, and she teaches in the United States and in the Netherlands and now in Germany, and she has this pedagogy that she has developed of mapping, conceptual mapping with kids, and she began mapping pandemics because she realized that teaching virology was much more relevant to kids if they could understand pandemics. Little did she know that we would have 2 years of blocked homes and COVID-19, which ended up being such a dramatic experience for all of us, uniting the world in such important ways, and revealing so much about where we are as societies. But what Emily does is that she picked up SARS, she picked up COVID-19, she picked up Ebola, she picked up Zika. She would put Zika in the middle of a gigantic collection of white papers, and then the kids would begin to ask questions. So why is it? How does it get transmitted? Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? Why the consequences with birth, birth defects, birth problems? Why is it in certain sectors of society and not in others? What are the religious beliefs behind Ebola, and how do we? What do doctors do? What do politicians do? What do women? And is this a gender type of thing? So these questions invite kids to begin to investigate, find information, find resources, and little by little they build these very complex and beautiful conceptual journeys or maps that in the end are very interdisciplinary. So you see like an exploration of culture there with the Zika map on your left. You see some explorations of film and the role of film and perceptions of of an emotional fears around COVID-19. So all of these mappings are like really putting in the students the agency of discovering, the agency of assessing evidence, assessing sources, puts in the students the possibility of constructing a synthesis that is not given by the teacher, is constructed by them. And over time, Emily has become better and better at really tackling issues. We knew very little about COVID-19 before we all had to start to understand it, right? So she has become more confident in really mapping problems that she did not have fully resolved in her own mind, but that together with her students was able to really gain depth and interdisciplinary dialogue. So kids have the opportunity to pay attention to what they are interested in, and then put that knowledge in dialogue with other students' interests. So here we see. Second example. This is the work of Steve. Steve teaches in the United States in a public school. This is like, I think it's 11th and 12th grade, I believe. And he teaches mathematics. So just like my teacher, Edith, what happened to Steve is that he needed to teach functions, so linear functions, logarithmic functions, exponentials, and so forth. And he was driving to school when he was listening to the National Public Radio in the United States, and he learned that the planet had only a certain capacity to hold the population that we have, and that researchers were trying to determine when exactly it is that the planet would stop being able to hold the population that we have, at what moment in population growth. So he thought that that was a really interesting question for his students, and instead of teaching logs and linear regressions and so forth in a very direct way, he decided, I'm going to give them a problem. I'm going to have them look at some data that is real data from the World Bank and so forth to try on population, to try to have them decide whether they think that population will grow linearly at infinitum, or whether it will stop growing at some point and it will be like more like a logarithmic again, or it will grow like it's growing exponentially. And so the kids had to students had to figure it out and do the map and plot the relationships in between and in time and population, and determine what they thought would be like the planet's carrying capacity, at what date, at what moment, what year the planet will stop being able to carry all of us. Super interesting work. The students were like absolutely fascinated trying to figure this problem out. They found out that, of course, experts debate about what that date is, and they learned not only that they could construct knowledge themselves, that when given some orientation, they were able to just figure this out. They were able to apply mathematics in a deep way to a problem that was very relevant. So that was really quite interesting for these kids, who then went on to study the ways in which population can be managed, right, and ethical ways of population management. So here we have mathematics and Steve. Next is a beautiful project that we have had for now about 8 years in collaboration with Japan. This is a public school in the United States too, in Washington, D.C. And these are very, very young children who for 2 years and ongoingly since have studied to become global environmental stewards. So these children have plenty of opportunities to connect with nature, to be in nature, to observe very carefully how butterflies come out of the chrysalis, how flowers bloom, how you can grow food in order to eat it and then nourish yourself, how to have and hold compost systems in order to feed the plants that they grow. And at some point in the process, they learn about particular animals and they study animals of their choice. And they try to empathize with these animals and really trying to find the voice of the animal. So whether it is a tiger, whether it's the elephants, whether it's but they, with an understanding of the situation, the conditions of living, what these animals love, the risks that they're facing, the whole school for Earth Day develops this beautiful, joyful parade in which, in this particular case, the children are representing the voice of either the sea or animals or plants or aspects of nature. So you see here one little girl sort of really carrying the voice of the ocean. She wants to really speak for the ocean. So here you have a really beautiful, very early sensibilization to love for the planet. And what we're trying to articulate in this project, and we're working quite hard with these teachers about this, is like, what is the role of love when it comes to global competence, and what is the role of love when it comes to educating our children? Love for others, love for self, love for planet, love for reading. So in a few years, I'm hoping that we can have like a good articulation of the centrality of love in this work on global competence. And finally, so the last slide that I have on stories of good learning for you is this is about stories, right? So on one side, the green part of the slide, what you see is like a stop motion story, and these are stories of migration. And the green side is like an image of a stop motion movie that children ages 4, 5, and 6 did in Greece. And this is a combination of children who are Greek and children who are Syrian, who have arrived with their families, crossing the Mediterranean. And here we have children co-constructing a story of migration with materials, with paint, with color, with little figurines and so forth, and moving this story forward, not only in order to understand what it means to leave one's place, to cross the ocean, and then to create a future, which is the most beautiful part of this story for me, is that how the children were able to just construct the future of these stories of migration of children who crossed from Syria or from Northern Africa. And so it was really sort of a very, very powerful moment, for this group of integrating around a story that was not any individual person's story, but it was like a collective story about an imaginary character who had to cross. And we will see a little bit more about the other side of the slide, which is we see this beautiful image of Aqual, who would be like a reference point in our conversations moving forward. So here we have sort of in this crafting and sharing connections with others through stories, we also have this image of children who are able to engage in complex issues, children who are engaged emotionally as well as cognitively, not only because we think about stories of migration, but also because we engage in the emotions that some of these, and we learn to manage the emotions that some of these stories sort of bring up for us and for others. There's a lot of empathy. There's a lot of learning how to listen this respectfully, learning how to speak up, how to share, and how much to share that feels comfortable. So there's a lot there about learning, not only about our minds learning, but really about our hearts learning as well. So, developing these forms of empathy. Now, all of these examples, in a way, sort of are efforts on the part of teachers, like all of us, for trying to educate young people for the world we seek, for the world we imagine for the future. And here's where I love this particular quote that some of you may sort of recognize. And it is that the role of the public education is not just to serve a public and as we hope to serve a broader, more inclusive public, but it is to create a public. And I think that this goes for private education as well. So we are creating the public of the future. And this is really not a question as to whether we are or we're not creating the public of the future. We are, in fact, creating the societies of the future with our everyday labor in classrooms, and whether they're like in early childhood like classrooms or in the playground or at the university. And here's what Neil Postman adds. He says the question is, what kind of public is this school creating, right? Is it a conglomerate of self-indulgent consumers? Is it angry, soulless, directionless masses? Is it indifferent, confused citizens? Or is it a public that is infused with confidence and a sense of purpose and respect for learning and tolerance? You can date, the use of tolerance, I would say, and rejoice in difference, or appreciation for difference, appreciation for human dignity, right? I think it matters that we understand that we are creating the public of the futures, the societies of the futures, that we have a very important role to play, and that we recognize that strength of our profession as educators and find the opportunities, just like this exchange, to concretely find ways to advance and shift our ideas of what children can do, how far they can go, and for what societies we are preparing them. And again, this reverts into our own sense of the societies that we believe we're participating in. So for some time, for example, we have been thinking about societies, and there's one narrative about society that is, okay, societies are about economic growth, and they're about, preparing children for jobs, and that's about preparing everybody for the job of the future, right? There are other narratives that are much more about, inviting young people to fulfill their potential and inviting societies to be more democratic. There's narratives that have to do with saving the planet in the time of the Anthropocene. So what are some of the narratives? What do we think as educators that we're coming from, that our societies are coming from? Where are they going? Where would we like them to go? And where do we situate our practice in that storyline of the societies in which we live? Which narratives about society do we agree with? Which ones do we interrogate? Because no matter what, whether we know it or not, in every interaction in the classroom, in every decision in a school, we are advancing a particular plot. And it could be a plot of a narrative that empowers children, that empowers youth, that gives them a sense of purpose for what they're learning. Or it could be a narrative that, unbeknown to us or without intention, is one of obey, 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 of children completing workshops and completing worksheets or completing work that is not meaningful to them, and they learn to obey. Children learning that that school really doesn't matter, you just have to play the game. Or children learning that school is all about passing to the next grade or getting the certificate in exchange for some things that I need to do. And I think that we need to recover the meaning of school. And I think that global education allows us a very powerful argument for how we recover the meaning of schooling. All right, so what learning do we seek? So you saw some really good examples, and I would like to introduce you to Akwal. And here's Akwal. Akwal in this moment is in Portland, Maine, a girl who is in 5th grade, and she is the daughter of a Sudanese family. Her mom is a refugee from Sudan. Her uncle is a refugee from Sudan. Her uncle came to the United States first, and he happened to be one of the lost boys of Sudan. These are like 20,000 children, boys that were abducted and turned into soldiers, youth, children, soldiers, or then rescued and sent to other countries as refugees. So Akwal's uncle, Mayok, had this opportunity of being rescued and brought to Atlanta, United States. A few years later, his mom, Akwal's mom, finds her brother, and they both end up moving to Portland, Maine. In Akwal's 5th grade, the teacher, Nancy, is trying to infuse global competence in the conversations and in her teaching. And part of it for her is really infusing the capacity for children to take perspective. So in a way, she's committed to making sure that at the end of the year, all of her children are really good at taking perspective. She has taken that particular angle on it. And part of her teaching had to do with teaching stories, writing, and storytelling, story sharing. So she invited the children to visit the library to see whose stories were available. The children discovered, of course, that there were no stories from Iraq or from Afghanistan or from Somalia or from Sudan, where many of the children were from. So they set the purpose of publishing books that would really tell the stories that were untold in the library in the school. And eventually they did produce a book. What's beautiful about this, let me see, we have that. Is that when Akwal interviewed her mom and wrote a story about her family coming to the United States, she was really very dedicated to sort of understanding the story of her family. So here are a couple of quotes from where from when she was describing the story she wanted to write. She wanted to write the story of migration, and she also wanted to write it from the perspective of each one of the characters, Mayok, herself, and her mom. So she says, Mayok never fled with his mom. That is how I took it. I heard what my mom was saying and took it from that perspective. She said Kakuma, so I used that in the story, but I had to research it more because I didn't know what it was. I found out Kakuma was a refugee camp, and I think it's hard to come to America. This is from a mom's perspective, and I think I'm going to tear up. She really, really connected with her mom's story, and she really connected with what had happened to her uncle. Next, she says, I think the story of Sudan is a great thing to write about. Some people know the Lost Boys as a group of boys who were just lost. They were not lost, they were captured. They were captured. They brought me, so some were tending cattle. And it says here, I got captured when I was tending cattle, and she's showing, right, in the text. They brought me to a refugee camp, and I had to hide lots of things. The boys, she explains, had to hide things because they could be killed just for having a picture of the family. So I included that in my story. So here we have, Akwal investigating the world, investigating the story of her family, and really trying to understand the perspectives and the experiences of others. So you wonder how much impact some of these experiences may have. So the children then share the stories, they exchange stories, learn from each other's stories, and publish the book and donate the book to the school, as well as to other schools in the district and the public libraries. So what I would like to do is to show you, invite you to listen to Akwal as we interview her, like about almost a year, like 9 months after the book was published. And what I would love for you to do is that as you listen to her, to try to name the qualities that you see in her learning. What is the kind of learning that Akwal is illustrating as she explains and goes back to remember what she had learned almost a year before. So let's use the chat to just put keywords on what are the qualities here. So is there joy in learning? Is there depth in learning? And what do you see that gives you the sense of, depth, or the sense of, owning her learning or so. So I imagine you're falling in love with Akwal, and as in which we did when we were interviewing her, and we're just so impressed by so many of the capacities that you're already naming, right? So someone we're saying what a voice she had. Oh, she should keep singing. There's like this Nicodemus, you're saying, this, like, she's deeply reflective and so centered in others, in her awareness. She's very, very, very aware of the other, right? So she teaches us so much about perspective. So I'm going to leave like a minute or so, a little bit less than a minute, just 30 seconds or so, just for us to put like some keywords about what we think, what calls our attention about her learning. Feel free to write them in Spanish if you feel more comfortable, or in any other language if you feel more comfortable. We'll do our best. Excellent. I can see wonderful ideas coming up in the chat. Really exciting to see that. So yes, I think that sort of so many of us are really connecting with this idea that she connects to life, right? She connects what she's learning about perspective taking, not only to the very important story that she wrote, but somehow she sees so many opportunities to really take perspective, and so she sees perspective taking everywhere around her, right? I know that so it's applying across multiple contexts. Some of you are saying she's invested in this. She owns the story. So this is not just the perspective taking idea, right? So I am the best person taking perspective. So this is not just something that she's learned and she has in her brain, but it's somehow she has become this kind of person, the best person to take perspective in her 6th grade classroom. So there's this sense of owning what we've learned, like really deep learning in the sense of owning what we have learned. Yeah, so Sue adds the fact that she has taken this notion of perspective taking and she has like a whole series of methods and approaches. So she shows flexibility in her understanding. So she can teach you how to follow somebody around to try to understand their perspective. She can teach you how to put yourself in the shoes of the person. She can teach you about like reading what the person says and how they say it, and reading how the physical, expressions of the person is in order to understand, what might be happening or why people might be bullying or being bullied. So really, really sort of complexity in her thinking, very rich complexity and very spontaneous complexity. It's not that she's sitting for an exam in this conversation. She's really, really speaking from her own repertoire, logical, sort of natural repertoire. I wonder what you think about her understanding of English literature, her ELA class. Here she is, in a way, sort of writing a story from 3 perspectives. This is very difficult to do. For those of you who teach literature, this is like a little Milan Kundera, the unbearable lightness of being. And so she is very difficult to try to get the timeline right, when one character starts speaking, when, and how do you connect the perspectives. And so that's really, really complex, really deep in the discipline of English and literature, right? We also have sort of a depth in her sense of purpose. She really wanted to write this story, not because she needed to do an assignment for school, but because people have it wrong. She needs to correct the record. People are thinking that the lost boys of Sudan were just silly boys that got lost, and she wants to make sure that people understand that they didn't just get lost, that they were captured and they were caring for cattle and they were oppressed. So a very important mission for her writing, a sense of purpose in her writing. Yeah. So so here Vicky says, this is synthesis, and author's craft is real. She has a real reason for writing. And what I think is that we need to sort of bring back sort of purpose for learning and for our kids and in education. We need to bring back the purpose for learning in a global stage, the purpose for learning in this world that seems to be so fragmented, and for which we need to double our efforts on grounds of empathy and love and understanding and critical thinking and critical love, because that is perhaps one of the narratives that is the most urgent ones. When we look at what's happening in the Middle East, how it's touching everybody around the world, what's happening in other conflicts, Ukraine, we saw Yemen, we saw so many situations in which we lost the ability to be interculturally competent or globally competent. And it seems to me that we are faced with a challenge, and the challenge is, what are we as educators going to do through the creation of a new public in the realms of influence that we have, whether it's like a little classroom of 15 children in early childhood classroom, or like a class of 400 students at the University of Buenos Aires, right? So how are we going to help, empower young people to change their minds so that they can stand in the world in a different way? So at Project Zero and in my own work, when we think about this, I think about learning that is necessarily whole. So here we have a Qual learning emotionally, learning ethically, learning cognitively. So she's developing all of these capacities as a whole person. And you can see her moving around, and expressing her repertoire that has ethics, it has social emotional dimensions, it has cognitive dimensions. So it's really the whole child here that is being engaged, right? So a question for us is, what about our work really engages the whole child? Second question is, and second quality to me is that it's relevant. It's clearly relevant. We do need to understand what happened with the lost boys of Sudan. We do need to understand that perspective taking is something that can really make you interact with others very differently and better. So it's really relevant for her, relevant for society, relevant for the world in which we live. Clearly so. And I think that global competence does exactly that. It helps us make sure that what children are learning, what young people are learning in schools is relevant. It's relevant locally, it's relevant interculturally, it's relevant for the world. And I think that that is something that, that matters enormously. It's also deep. So we saw the complexity of her depth in literature, the complexity of her depth in perspective taking, the sort of the capacity to do so. So we are aspiring, for really good thinkers in literature, really good thinkers, really good actors in mathematics or in science, or you name it. Right? And the other thing is that it is very long lasting, and I want to stay a moment here in this idea. Long lasting, having to do with how many times. Or maybe the question is, how would we change how we teach if the assessment of what kids learn happened 9 months after the fact? How would we teach differently if we were shooting for learning that is really long-lasting, transformational? And I think that we can think about global learning and global competence learning with a commitment to transformational learning. Learning that stays with our children, stays with us as adults, stays with our youth for a long, long time. At Project Zero, we tend to describe those long-lasting forms of learning as dispositions. And they are like not only having an ability, like taking perspective, but also a sensitivity to many moments around in informal context when not prompted to really engage in that kind of behavior and that kind of thinking, that kind of feeling, like perspective taking. And finally, an inclination, a motivation, and an impulse to really do this, to become this person who. So when we think about that, then there's particular ways of teaching, and these ways of teaching have to do with developing habits of mind, or developing what we call dispositions. And here I'll just wrap up very briefly with this idea of thinking routines. And if I were to describe what these thinking routines are, is in Nancy's classroom. The idea of let's put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, and let's try to think about what the world feels like, smells like, looks like, what it sounds like to somebody who is in that position, was like a constant way of thinking, a constant question. The labeling of perspective taking. So that's my perspective, that's your perspective, and what makes you say so in your perspective? What makes you say so for that perspective? What makes you say so? So these are small interventions, like what makes you say so, or see, think, and wonder, like really looking at something very closely, thinking about it very deeply, and wondering and opening questions about what else we would want to understand. These are small interventions that teachers habitually use in their practice. And what we observe is that over time, kids become better and better at making all of these connections, all of the connections that you were pointing out earlier with Katy Perry and with daily life and the bully and so forth. Our connections are part of like a whole network of connections that these children have experienced throughout the year. And so if we were to embark in the mission of perspective taking, say, or communicating across differences, so at Project Zero, we have a collection of really, really powerful routines, small interventions that we use in different contexts, with different content and so forth, and about developing such habits. I will just show you very briefly an exploration of one of these routines. This here is an image of a woman from Guatemala, a Mom woman who came to the United States, and this is a representation of her work, of her It's a portrait, it's a memorial actually, because she died after she crossed or while she was crossing. And when faced with something, an image like this, we might invite in these routines, invite our young people to ask the question of, what do we see? What does this image make us think about? What do we wonder about? And opening up, curiosity about the story of a person like Claudia Patricia, this woman. But then, because we want young people to open up the proactive seeking dignity in others, or seeking to understand other people's lives and valuing others, recognizing others, we ask the question of, can we seek to see this person's emotions? Can we seek to see this person's strengths? Can we seek to see how a person like Claudia Patricia, with all her life experiences and so forth, can connect to our own life? And can we seek to see the ways in which we can find, or the words that we can find to describe her human dignity? So with seeking to see is like another one of these routines that can we seek to see human dignity in the other? And if we were to just ask this question in our history class, can we seek to see human dignity here? Can we seek to see strength here? Can we seek to see the emotional experience of this person here? Our research shows that there's like a rise in empathy, a rise in respect, a rise in commitment to being open to other people's lives. So with that, I would like to, I'm closing with, Claudia Patricia, I would like to just, briefly, to close it now. I think that we don't have too much more time for questions, but if there's anything that you'd like to put up, and I'll move, if you remove these slides, I'm going to just bring us to the last slide of resources. Stop sharing. Stop sharing.
Okay.
Stop sharing.
Sorry. Okay, there we go.
Excellent.
If you have any questions for Veronica, please add them to the chat. People loved what you had to say, Veronica, and there were a couple comments that I starred along the way. One person said she was here to help make the world less cruel. I can help my students have a perspective in a hard time. Another person commented, great reminder that we have the power to manage our own narrative. Another person referenced deeper learning, which you and I have talked a lot about, and how you can do both. You can have academically rigorous teaching and learning going on and have it be deeper and more meaningful as well. And I would add, if you need the time and the expertise to be a designer of learning experiences and empower teachers to be that way. I would add that. And then another comment was, again, kind of referencing the same thing. When I think about this work, I think about how learning can be joyful and purposeful at the same time. So those are a couple things that I noticed in our comments. People were sharing very nicely. Any questions for anyone specifically? Here's one question. Sama wants to meet the people that you're talking about. So I don't know if there's a possibility of that, but I don't know what you suggest.
Yeah, give me. So let's connect via email. I will make sure that at least one person you'll meet. One of these teachers are phenomenal.
Okay.
If I can make it happen, but
okay. So if you want to put your email in the chat, Veronica, then people can connect with you. Friends, you can also connect with her. Profile is also on the speakers part of the reception page, so you can also connect to Veronica that way as well. And she also can be sent a message through the conference platform too. So thank you so much, Veronica. This has been the perfect start to our day and set the tone of deeper learning for global competence. And I really appreciate this. The other comment that I meant to say at the beginning of this is that we need this more than ever. Every time we have a virtual or a face-to-face outing event, it seems like there's something going on in the world where it calls for more of this. And that couldn't be truer now. So I think we have a really great audience here who wants to change the world and help students become change makers and be as thoughtful as the students that we saw in your presentation. So I'm really grateful, and I think everybody else is as well. We have 5 more minutes until the next session, so we're going to say goodbye for right now. But there's a whole slew of sessions coming up, general sessions and also featured ones on the featured presentation stage. Our next keynote will be at 3:00 with Bonnie Koenig. And thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you, Veronica. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucy. And I will be putting links to the thinking routines and to some Smithsonian materials on the profile, I suppose.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop streaming right now, and then everybody can move to their next session.
Thank you, everybody.